What is going on, guys? I'm Paul Ryan, your host of the Not ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. Making his return is the best co-host in the world, Dave Pigskin Papers Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. It's been a while, so I'm very happy to be back on the air with you, doing what we like to do, which is talking football. And Mets 6, Yankees 2. Game isn't over yet. That's halfway through the sixth inning, but that has me smiling tonight. How are you doing?
Absolutely. The summer is a lot easier to go through when your baseball teams are playing well.
Yeah, and the Mets weren't for the first 2 months of the season, so it's been a nice turnaround for them. How are you and the Texas Rangers doing?
I just looked at the score. Rangers are down to the White Sox 2-1, but it's been a weird series. However, the Rangers have found a way to. They had a bottom of the 10th inning win, and then they won in 9 last night. So I'm hoping to make it 3-0 tonight.
Yeah, you get a lot of good sports going on down in Dallas this year. It's between all the teams. You got a lot of good teams right now. That's nice for a city. Boston went through that like 10 years. Well, even now, I mean, the Celtics winning, but it's nice to be playing for championships.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I was just thinking how the Mavericks are kind of similar to that Boston team that went to the finals in 2022 versus the Golden State Warriors and lost. I think that's kind of where the Mavericks are at right now.
Yeah. We'll see.
Well, Dave, this isn't a basketball podcast. Let's get back to football. Where can we find you on X?
Nor is it a baseball podcast. You can find me on X at Pigskin Papers. Big announcement from me in terms of where my content is, because I don't think I've been on the show since I moved to a new site for all my content. So I have joined the writing team at Big Blue View, which is the Giants blog on SB Nation. Hopefully everyone's familiar with SB Nation. They have a blog for pretty much every team in the 4 professional sports. And they're not like Homer blogs. They're, for the most part, very objective writing about the different teams, just going deeper than national media. And I was brought in there really to do my fantasy content, but I'll also be doing some Giants news content. But all of my preseason fantasy content is there. And I just put out in the last week rankings, tiers, and commentary for redraft leagues for 2024 at the quarterback and running back positions, and wide receiver and tight end will be up soon. And then I'll have some draft strategy articles, players I'm avoiding and targeting at ADP, kind of all the stuff I've had in past years in terms of draft prep heading through the summer. And then during the season, I'll have 2 articles a week, a waiver wire column on Mondays and a weekly fantasy preview kind of start-sit column usually on Thursdays. So I'm very excited about that. And like I said, it'll really be the same content that I've had the last few years, but in a more professional environment where I don't have to do everything myself and I'm supported and part of a team, which I really like. I'm even getting paid a little, which is also good. But it's a nice thing for me, and I'm excited about it. Paul, where can people find your content, your Cowboys pod, all of that?
Well, first and foremost, congratulations, Dave, on the new opportunity, man. You've earned it. Love your writing. Love everything you do, man. So congratulations.
Thank you much, Paul. And you've helped me a lot along the way. So especially figuring out Twitter and how to get more visibility there and bringing me along and bringing me onto this podcast. So I really appreciate all the bootstrapping help you've given me. When I first came onto Twitter, I didn't know what I was doing. And you were one of the first people that kind of like befriended me and said, hey man, you should try this, you should try that. Let me introduce you to these people who, have a lot of followers. And I really appreciate that because I knew nothing. I mean, I don't even have a Facebook page. I do not have a social media imprint and never did. And so I really appreciate all that you've done to show me some ropes, because I'm old, like I'm I didn't grow up with social media at all. And my kids don't live at home anymore, so they can't show me either. So anyway, Paul, you were saying, where can we find your content?
Yes, you can find my content right now on YouTube and on X, aka Twitter, doing cowboy stuff every Monday, and of course doing fantasy stuff as well on YouTube and on Twitter. Here, either with Dave, or we've been bringing on guests of the show, which have been really nice episodes. We're currently breaking down our divisions of the NFL with a fantasy perspective. So make sure to check those out, guys. I think there's some really good information. And like I said, man, we've had some really great guests. It'll be nice when adding Dave back to the fold with some of these guests.
Looking forward to that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, Dave. Well, it's good to have you back, man. And today we'll be taking a break from our Divisions of Fantasy series. And instead, we'll be talking about Scott Fishbowl 14, where we each just completed drafting our fantasy teams and some training camp news.
Absolutely. And, we'll try to make this, look, no one likes hearing about other people's fantasy teams all that much. But I thought that by going through our drafts and talking about our teams, it would give us a good opportunity to kind of preview the season a little bit, preview draft season, kind of how we're thinking about different players, different position groups, different draft strategies. So we'll try not to just make this, then I took this guy and then I took this guy and, my team is so great. That's not the purpose of this exercise. The purpose of this exercise is really to kind of just continue our preseason fantasy football coverage. And this is just sort of one way to do it. It's almost like doing if we did a mock draft on the air, which, other podcasts do plenty of. And then they just kind of talk about their picks and what they were thinking about.
Right.
For those who aren't familiar, I have to assume most people at this point know what Scott Fishbowl is, but maybe we'll take a couple minutes just to kind of set the stage because some people don't know what it is. Or people who are in it just, want to hear more about it so they understand it better. So Scott Fishbowl, which was put together by an industry expert named Scott Fish, which is why it's called Scott Fishbowl, is now in its 14th year. And it's, I believe, the single largest fantasy football league in the world with close to 4,000 participants across more than 312 team divisions. People are participating from all over the world. There's a mix of live drafts and slow drafts, which Paul and I both did slow drafts. There are both industry experts and, people like Paul and me who aren't so much big experts, but are content creators in the industry. But, the biggest names in the industry, people like Matthew Berry are participants in Scott Fishbowl and have teams. The whole thing is for charity. It raises money for a great organization called fantasycares.org, which I think the main thing they do is like a toys for tots around the holidays. And they've raised, tons of money. The league is a free league. You don't pay to enter. There's no prizes. There's no cash prizes. But most people who participate in the league make charitable donations. They buy merchandise, which some of that goes to the charity. And so it's for a great cause. And it's also really a lot of fun and builds a lot of community. There are all sorts of side chats and position chats and mock drafts leading up to the Scott Fishbowl drafts, which are all pretty much complete now. It's kind of like the first 2 to 3 weeks of July. It takes a while. These slow drafts can take up to 2 weeks. But it brings together people around fantasy football, which is very, exciting and builds community. You meet a lot of people through it, through all these chats. So I'm in it for the third year in a row. And Paul is in Scott Fishbowl for the 5th year in a row. I don't think either of us has ever gone too far. I had my first year, I think I made it 3 or 4 rounds into the playoffs. Last year I had a bunch of injuries and missed the playoffs. Anytime you miss the playoffs, just blame a bunch of injuries. It's the easiest way to explain a bad performance. But in any case, if people who are listening want to get in on this, you have to be signed up to get in. And this year they had over 40,000 signups for like 4,000 spots. So not everyone gets in, but they also have mirror leagues and They have these best ball eliminator leagues. It's all connected to Scott Fishbowl. But if you go to scottfishbowl.com, I think that's the web address, you can register for Scott Fishbowl 15, which will be next year's, and hopefully you'll get in. But in any case, it's a very, for a worthy cause, a very fun thing built around fantasy football. So Paul, maybe, talk a little bit just about the format, some of the quirks. This is not your standard home league. It's constructed differently. Scott tweaks the scoring every year to try to make it interesting and try to give people, since there are so many teams, like different ways to build. And there's one of the fun things about Scott Fishbowl is because of the way it's constructed with so many flex spots, which Paul will talk about in a second. There's really no right or wrong way to build a team. There are a lot of different builds that can be successful. You'll see a lot of like bully tight end, or people taking their quarterbacks early. It's a super flex league. People taking their QBs late. There's all different ways to do it. So Paul, why don't you talk a little bit about how Scott Fishbowl is actually played, which will help people understand why we drafted the way we drafted.
Right. Well, Dave, you mentioned how Scott Fishbowl, brings people together. What's interesting about the Scott Fishbowl is, with so many participants, you've got to do a lot of the drafting online, right? And Scott Fishbowl offers two platforms, Sleeper and My Fantasy League. But in addition to drafting online, there are a lot of live drafts in major cities, looking at Vegas and New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and Dallas, etc. Which just, again, talk about bringing people together, meeting people in the industry, and just making connections and making new friends. That's no better way to do that than a live draft. And, another element of fun is the different themes in the Scott Fishbowl. This year, there's a movie theme. We're going to talk about our divisions a little bit later, but there's been cartoon characters and just a variety of things, video games. There was even like states and cities and countries, things like that. That was Scott Fishbowl 12. It's just, again, just picking your division kind of based on your favorite movie growing up or your favorite video game character, cartoon character is a lot of fun as well. Can lead to a pretty cool T-shirt, what Scott Fishbowl does a great job of, with all the different T-shirts for the divisions and everything, kind of as a memorabilia for your participation in the league. And also all those sales, I believe, also go to Fantasy Cares for the charity as well, which is really cool. Now, as far as drafting goes, it is a snake draft with a third round reversal. Dave mentioned unique scoring. It is super flex. It is tight end premium. There's also points per first down, return points, and kicker points. There's a big advantage there for the good kickers as well. And as far as your starting lineup goes, you start one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, one tight end, one super flex, one kicker on sleeper only, and then you have 6 or 7 flexes. So you mentioned the different draft strategies. I mean, with this kind of lineup, that opens up a lot of possibilities there. And you start 11 starters, and you have 11 bench players. So you've got a team of 22 total spots. As Dave mentioned, the competition will last 11 weeks long, and then you go into a head-to-head playoff kind of tournament where the highest scores from each game move on and advance into the playoffs there.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. It's like you said, an interesting format. One other thing, so each week during the season you play 2 games, and this is something I really like. I'm not a fan of head-to-head in fantasy, and I've written about that, and people fight me on it. The main league I play in is a 14-team league, and what we do is every week the 7 highest scores get a win and the 7 lowest scores get a loss, as opposed to doing head-to-head. What Scott Fishbowl does is you do play head-to-head every week, but you also play a game against the median score in your division. So if you're the second highest scoring team in a week in your division, but you happen to play the team that scored the most, you would get 1 win and 1 loss for that week. So unlike head-to-head where you had the second highest score and you come away with nothing, at least this way you do get rewarded for having kind of like a top half score in the division. And so after 11 weeks, you've actually got a record of 22, right? Because each week you're playing kind of 2 games. So I forget how many wins it takes to make the playoffs, and then after a certain number of wins, it goes by points. But obviously, like any fantasy league, there's luck involved, there's injuries involved. There's no trading is one other thing, which you can understand in a league this big, and like, you don't know who knows who. Like, I have one friend that was in my division. Like, we picked the division together, but for the most part, you're with strangers. So there's no trading, but there are waivers every week, and you have $100 waiver budget. So, and it's blind bidding. And what I've found in the 2 years I've been in is there's some teams are more engaged than others. Like on waivers, there's some teams that kind of don't use it, which is silly. But waivers are important when you can't make trades, especially because it's really the only way you can change your team from what you draft in early July. And obviously, when you're drafting in early July, like I drafted J.K. Dobbins, we'll get to that later. He might not, he could be a cut casualty. I mean, he's had so many injuries, who knows? So the team you drafted, you're drafting early. You might draft guys that don't make an NFL roster, or, someone gets traded in their backups or whatever. Anyway, we'll get to all that. In any case, we have a decent amount to talk about as we go through our teams, but I'll start with this, Paul. How did you like the experience this year? Did your slow draft move pretty well? Did anyone time out? Did you have any frustrating long waits, or like times when you were on the clock and you were in the middle of something and couldn't make a pick? Like, how did your draft go? And by the way, people have 8 hours to make a pick. And the clock freezes from like midnight to 8 a.m. So you can have some long waits. Like, you can go a day where you don't make a pick.
So as far as the draft room goes, the league, a lot of people that were in this particular league, this division, were all from Connecticut. I am not from Connecticut, so I kind of was feeling a little lift out there because they all already had kind of an instant connection, right? As far as the pace of the draft, the first couple of rounds went pretty well, but then there were times where other drafters had been on the clock for about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sometimes one person, I think, got all the way down to half an hour, maybe even 15 minutes, I think. I know as far as I go, the most I ever was on the clock for was maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours. I tried to respect people's time, and I thought we all did a good job of tagging each other, letting each other know when we were on the clock in this division, which was nice, which really helps speed up the draft. But, some people have different time zones, different schedules, different work hours and things like that, so it can be difficult. But I thought the draft overall went pretty smoothly. This was definitely not my first slow draft by any means. And at a tournament this big, it only makes sense to have a slow draft. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, our draft went pretty well. One person timed out, and it was the person in front of me when it happened. So I was all ready. There were like kind of 2 players. I don't even remember what round it was, but there were 2 players I had my eye on, and I was like, he's going to snipe me. And then I just wait 8 hours, and then he didn't take either one of them. So then I had to spend, because I was just going to, like, I kind of assumed he was going to take one of them. And I'm like, I'll just take the other one. And then when he didn't take either of them, then I took a little bit of time. But for the most part, our draft moved well. We had a division chat on X, which all 12 teams were in. So people were like kind of tagging, like, OTC, and then tagging you. So if you looked on X, you would see you had that notification. And that helped move it along. We had a pretty good, we were done in a week, maybe like 9 days, which is faster than the last 2 years from what I remember. So we moved pretty well.
That's nice. Kind of sticking here with the SFB, the Scott Fishbowl talk. How did you prep for your draft, Dave?
Yeah, I didn't really do anything special. I started writing about 3 or 4 weeks ago, like kind of my first off-season draft content for Big Blue View. So I was kind of already in the mode of, kind of making player rankings and writing columns about fantasy football for 2024. So I kind of was already in that headspace. I did do a couple mock drafts, but really the main thing I did, and this is sort of advice for any fantasy league you're in, but especially one with quirky rules, is I made sure I spent like half an hour just studying the new scoring. I found like a couple people had done like some spreadsheets showing like last year how people scored under this year's scoring rules, and made sure I understood the roster requirements and how just any scoring changes from last year, like the returner points, was really the main thing. But they also, one other thing that changed this year is like the QB yardage went down. The scoring went down for that, which I thought devalued quarterbacks a little bit. So that kind of had me rethink my strategy in terms of when I was going to target QBs, because it is a super flex. So can't wait too long. And a lot of QBs go in the first 2 rounds.
And it's 6 points per pass TD, I believe, right?
It's 6 points per pass TD, which kind of makes up for the yardage thing. But I really didn't do anything special because I was already kind of starting to think about columns I was going to write. So I was already researching fantasy stuff. How about you, Paul? What did you do to prep for your draft?
To be totally honest, Dave, I've never prepared for an SFB draft. Reason being is I've been in so many different leagues with different scoring formats that I've kind of, get a pretty good understanding when there's those little things like a extra additional point per first down and tight end premium, super flex, things like that. I feel pretty confident in just the research I do in the off season, the research I do for the show, and having a good understanding of, which teams are the better fantasy targets and which ones are probably not going to be very good this year. So I feel like if you know those types of things, then you can do pretty well in this type of format, just because of how many different ways you can build a team.
Yeah, I agree with that, which is why I didn't really go out of my way to do anything extra. Other than I wanted to do a couple of mock drafts, and mock drafts are dangerous because people don't really draft like it's real.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a couple mock drafts from my draft position, just to kind of see like, okay, if I take a tight end in round 1, or if I take a QB in round 1, like what's coming back to me, But again, the mock drafts are only so helpful because they're not that realistic a lot of the time. The first mock draft I did, someone took CJ Stroud with the first pick. Like that's probably not going to happen. I mean, maybe he went with the first pick in 1 division out of 300 divisions. So,
yeah.
Anyway, Scott Fishbowl is a very big tournament, like some other tournaments that are out there. Some of the big best ball tournaments on Underdog and things like that. So some people would argue that in a league this big, you have to do something like a little different, like something to differentiate how you're building your team to give yourself a chance to be an outlier. Other people would just say, look, build your best team and see what happens. You don't have to do anything too crazy. What was your were you a swing for the fence guy? Like what was your strategy going in, and what kind of build did you want to pursue?
My initial strategy was to double tap quarterbacks with my first 2 picks because of the 6 point per TD. I was looking to put together a quarterback room with, somebody who's going to throw for a lot of TDs, like a Patrick Mahomes, and then somebody like an Anthony Richardson or a Jaden Daniels, somebody with the mobile to get points that way. I was looking to do that, but we'll talk about it more in depth later. But my plans were spoiled early and often in this draft, Dave. How about you?
Yeah, I'm a stubborn drafter, and I kind of only know one way to draft in fantasy, which is just to kind of try to build a balanced team. Try not to take too much undue risk early. And sort of preserve the risk taking for later when it'll hurt me less if you whiff, and just try to build a solid team and get good value where I can. So this kind of format, and I'm really used to auction drafting. I don't like snake drafts all that much. So this kind of drafting is a little bit of a challenge for me, but the one thing I would say I did different and to try to differentiate a little bit is I tried to stack a little bit more than I normally would, and I'll get into that when we talk about a little bit about how we built our team and players we took. That was sort of the one thing I did to try to just give myself the ability to spike a little bit more week to week. And obviously that can mean down weeks, and your bye weeks get harder when you've got like, a quarterback and one of his receivers or two of his receivers. But in any case, that was the one thing I would say I did a little bit differently.
So let's talk about our divisions, Dave, where we drafted from, and what division did you want, and what spot did you want, and why?
All right, so hopefully our divisions are not a reflection of anything about us, because I'm in our habits, because I'm in the Cheech and Chong division. I just always loved those Cheech and Chong movies. The main thing for me is I wanted to draft on MFL and not sleeper, and most of my favorite movies that they had divisions for, like The Godfather and a whole bunch of other movies, were only on sleeper, and I wanted MFL, so I wanted the 8th draft slot, 8th or 9th. So I kind of just, the first division I found that was on MFL and had the 8th spot available, I just grabbed, and I do like Cheech and Chong movies, or at least 2 of them. So that's where I ended up. I did want to be towards the back end of the round, and that's because of that 3rd round reversal. And I didn't want to be on an end. I don't like in this kind of slow snake draft, just the thought of going like 2 days without making a pick, and I don't like being that vulnerable to position runs. To be like where you don't make a pick for 22 picks or 20 picks. How about you, Paul? What division are you in, and what pick did you select, or was it selected for you?
So my pick, I ended up going with the Leonardo division. Shout out to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, one of my favorites, cartoons, movies growing up, and I went with pick 5. I actually wanted the 12th spot, but it was taken, so I figured I'd take a top 5 pick and grab a surefire stud quarterback. It wasn't necessarily the slot I wanted, but it worked out pretty well, I feel like.
Yeah, I was actually, last year I picked slot 5, and I didn't mind that. It's close enough to the middle. I took Lamar Jackson, I think, with the 1.05 last year. All right, so why don't we just take a minute, and we'll do this quickly because then we'll talk about our picks, and just read our entire roster from pick 1 to pick 22. So you go first. I got mine on my phone here, so let me pull it up. You read your roster, and then I'll read mine.
So we've got Mr. Patrick Mahomes, QB1. I've got Jahmyr Gibbs. What's that?
I said heard of him.
Yes, sir. Jahmyr Gibbs, running back at Detroit Lions. Chris Olave, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. Rookie Ben Sinnott for Washington Commanders tight end. Devon Achane, running back Miami. T. Higgins, Tank Dell, Malik Neighbors, Hollywood Brown, Geno Smith. I don't currently have a kicker. I have rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy, Daniel Jones, Will Shipley for the Eagles, Audric Estime for the Broncos, Bucky Irving, Jalen Warren, Troy Franklin, Roman Wilson, Joshua Palmer, Wan'Dale Robinson, Treylon Burks, and Jonnu Smith rounds out the tight end room. How about you, Dave?
So you were on MFL, right? Because you don't have a kicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sleeper, you have to draft one because you have to start one.
No, I was on sleeper. I'm sorry.
Don't you have to have a kicker, or you could just pick one up?
I can just pick one up, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if people can see this. This is my cool someone made this for me. Cool like avatar thing of my fantasy team. So I'll do mine in order from round 1. So I was at the 8th pick again. CeeDee Lamb, who better get a contract. First round pick. 2nd round, Sam Laporta, then A.J. Brown, then Jared Goff, then James Cook, Cooper Kupp, Matt Stafford, Najee Harris, Will Levis. So I took a 3rd quarterback pretty early. Gus Edwards, 10th. That was 10th round. Khalil Shakir, Jamison Williams, Tyler Conklin, Keon Coleman, J.K. Dobbins, Ray Davis, Kaimi Fairbairn, Jake Elliott, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Darnell Mooney, Will Dissly, and my last pick, a guy I had not heard of, Anthony Gould, who's a rookie on the Colts and hopefully is their kick and punt returner.
Interesting.
Those are our rosters.
Yeah, so I can't wait to talk a little bit more about it because I like your team a lot.
Thanks. I like yours too. I think you took some calculated risks that I want to talk about when we get to your team.
Yeah. So okay, Dave, take us through your first 5 picks. What were your dilemmas, and how did you land on those you did take?
Yeah. So my biggest dilemma was in the first round. I had decided to wait on quarterback, just sort of thinking that there's a lot of them this year, and that I'd be able to get 2 pretty good ones if I waited, and I could, get improvement at other key positions. But I didn't expect Anthony Richardson to be there at the 8th pick, and he was, because Bijan Robinson and Breece Holmes went with the 6th and 7th picks after McCaffrey and the top 4 quarterbacks. So I really had a debate whether to take Richardson there, and I took a long time. It took like an hour in the middle of the day, going through different scenarios in my head, but ultimately decided I could get, that CD was safer. He was my number 1 receiver on my board. He's number 1 on most boards. So I took him there. When it came back around in the second round, my plan all along was to get Laporta or Kelsey if they were there, with a preference for Laporta, and someone took Kelsey before me. So I jumped on Laporta. That was like a turn your card in quick. Third round, I had a little bit of a dilemma because I had thought about bullying tight end, and McBride was gone, but Kincaid was there, and I really like him this year with the departures, of Diggs and Gabe Davis. That's like over 200 targets out the door in Buffalo. And I didn't have a running back yet, and I didn't have a quarterback yet, but the quarterbacks were kind of picked clean. There really wasn't anyone that was – the value was there with the 5th pick. Remember, it's a reversal, so it was the 5th pick of the third round. But A.J. Brown was still on the board, so it kind of came down to him or Kincaid or Kieran Williams, because I didn't have a running back yet. And A.J. Brown was like my 11th or – well, no, I guess in a super flex, maybe, I don't know, like my 15th overall rated player, and I was picking it like the 29th pick, so I just kind of felt like I had to take him. So I grabbed A.J. Brown there. So now after 3 picks, I had 2 receivers when my original plan was I'll wait on receiver also, and a tight end. So then I took Jared Goff with the 4th pick, and quarterback was really getting drafted early, and I needed one of him or Tua or Trevor Lawrence to make it back to me, because then there was kind of a drop-off in my mind and in my rankings. But Goff made it back to me, and then I still didn't have a running back. And the same kind of thing. There was a big run on running backs, and there were like the last one of 5 that I wanted was Cook, who made it back to me. But I liked him better than some of the ones who went right before him, like Ken Walker. So that was my first 5 picks, and I felt pretty good after those 5. I had kind of one of everything and 2 receivers. How about you, Paul? Take us through your first 5 picks, kind of where you had thought dilemmas, what you tried to accomplish. Did you get badly sniped at all? Anything like that?
So I mentioned my goal strategy was to double type quarterback. My ultimate goal was to pair Mahomes with a guy like an Anthony Richardson, only for Richardson to be drafted 11th overall, which I kind of found surprising. But in this format, it makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, I could draft Jaden Daniels in the 3rd because his ADP was 50, and the teams behind me already had stud quarterbacks. Because of points per first down, I took a risk and drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in round 2, thinking Daniels would be there for the taking in round 3, only for Daniels to get taken 2 picks later in the 2nd round. So after that, I was a bit on tilt, and I decided in round 3 and moving forward, I'd go upside. So with my 3rd pick, I took another chance on a high ceiling player and running back Devon Achane for the Miami Dolphins. And my 4th and 5th round picks weren't very exciting. And after a run on tight ends and quarterbacks by my league mates, I decided wide receiver was the move. And I took Malik Neighbors and Chris Olave as my wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. Both players are the unquestioned alphas on their teams, but they both have questions at QB. Again, I still like the upside for those guys as well.
I'll tell you one thing. Between Gibbs and the chain, you have probably the two most exciting running backs in the league. And, you're going to get some long touchdowns. And, and Malik Neighbors, too, could be a player who, has a lot of explosive plays if they can get him the ball in space or behind the defense. So, you could have a team that has some spike weeks, I think. Based on the way you did you went through those first 5 picks. You definitely took upside players.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, we've talked about your first 5 picks. Let's think about your next 5. What were your dilemmas, and how did you land on those guys that you took in rounds 6 through 10?
Right. So for my 6th round pick, like I said, at that point I've got a quarterback, a running back, 2 receivers, and a tight end. And so I was sort of like best player available.
Yeah.
And there were a couple running backs I liked. There weren't really, I was hoping against hope that Jake Ferguson would make it to me in the 6th round. He didn't come close. Right after I took James Cook in the 5th, he went like 2 picks later because I really wanted him, even though I already had CeeDee Lamb. I just think that in that offense, and I can't get out of my head the 3 touchdowns he scored in garbage time against the Packers in that playoff game, his last game last year. So, but he wasn't there, so there really wasn't a tight end. So I was staring at Cooper Kupp, and I was like, he's 2 years removed from maybe the greatest fantasy season ever by a receiver, and he's fully healthy now. And I think if he's fully healthy, he's still the number 1 receiver on the Rams potentially. So I thought the value there was just too good. And I took him, and I knew that based on, a lot of the teams before it came back to me had 2 quarterbacks, and I wanted to get my 2nd quarterback. I didn't want to be worried about that and be, sort of picking from like Bryce Young and Gardner Minshew and people like that, because quarterbacks were going. It came back to me, and Stafford and Cousins were both on the board. And I had Cousins ranked 1 spot ahead of Stafford, but I had just taken Cooper Kupp, and I couldn't resist. So I took Stafford. Then in the 8th round, I took Najee. I wasn't that thrilled with that, but I think with Arthur Smith there, I am kind of high on both him and Warren this year. I sort of, in the running backs column that I just wrote, I kind of wrote that I think that they are both fantasy viable this year as like RB2s or flexes. Obviously, we'll see how Arthur Smith, who can be vexing for fantasy managers, as we learned in his time in Atlanta, we'll see how he uses those running backs. Then in the 9th round, I thought about taking Jaylen Warren, like just backing up Najee with Warren. But then I was like, do I really want both, have to guess or have to play them both? And I really wanted a 3rd quarterback, and it was getting really thin, and I'm high on Will Levis. So I didn't really want to use a 3rd of my first 9 picks on a 3rd QB, but I did, which started a run on the end of quarterback. So I kind of was okay with that. And then in the 10th, I took Gus Edwards. He was just sort of the only quote unquote starting running back left. And I wanted one more running back. So that was my picks 6 through 10. I liked where my draft started better than that. This section I didn't love, but I was satisfied with it.
Yeah.
How about you, Paul? What did you do 6 through 10 to back up all those upside picks you took?
Well, round 6, 7, and 8, I stuck with wide receivers because of value and upside, and I wanted some players I don't have on many, if any, teams. I took Tank Dell in round 6. He was an easy pick for me, especially as my wide receiver 3. Round 7, T. Higgins was still there, and with the holdout and drama in the rearview mirror, at least we hope so, the Bengals' offense is one of the best as long as Joe Burrow is playing, and T. Higgins has been a beneficiary when Burrow is leading the way, so I like that pick as well. Round 8, Hollywood Brown was there, and having Mahomes on my team, it made too much sense not to stack the Chiefs quarterback and wide receiver. So up to this point, most of, if not all, the tight ends with top 12 potential have been drafted. There was a push on quarterback, so I didn't feel the need to take my 2nd one yet. So I added my third running back in Jaylen Warren with my 9th pick. One key factor in my roster build and strategy was I wanted to have players who I know will start for me every week as long as they're healthy. And then in the 10th round, there was a group of quarterbacks who I liked and offered some upside and mobility that I thought would pair nicely with Mahomes. Geno Smith was there for me in round 9, and that again was a big discount in my opinion. Geno Smith is a bounce back candidate for me this year.
Yeah. Nice. All right. I like. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dave. What were your favorite picks that you took after pick 10? What's that?
I was just saying I really liked the Hollywood pick. I wanted him if I could get him, but he went in the 7th round, I think, in my draft.
Yeah.
It's especially nice because you've got Mahomes. That's a good stack. So I'm sorry, you had asked me a question.
No, well, just to comment on your comment, I don't usually stack in like a start-sit league just because stacks are better for best ball. But in this format, you kind of want to get unique, and like I said, it just kind of made sense to do that there, especially in this kind of scoring format where you want those spike weeks.
Yep, 100%.
So, what were your favorite picks that you took after pick 10?
Yeah, it was the next 4, actually, which I thought was the best part of my draft, and kind of where like the draft was. Sometimes you feel like the draft is coming to you, like the guys you want don't get sniped, and they're just there, and it's easy picks. So I took Khalil Shakir on the Bills in the 11th, hoping that he has the return duties. But even if he doesn't, he's the only receiver on that team that has played with Josh Allen in a meaningful way. And I do think Kincaid will lead that team in targets probably, but I like Shakir's upside. He's got deep speed. And again, if he is the kick or the punt returner, that should make him startable with the way the format is, and especially if he's out there in 2 and 3 receiver sets and, getting a decent target volume. So I liked him. He was someone I was targeting. I took Jameson Williams in the 12th, another guy I was targeting, third year. They're both of those guys are actually third year receivers. And, there's a long history of third year receivers breaking out. And Jameson, the first 2 years of his career kind of couldn't have gone any worse. But you saw it in that San Francisco playoff game. He had 2 touchdowns, and I do think that he will, with Josh Reynolds gone, he's their starting outside receiver. And I know that Laporta and Amon-Ra will get the bulk of, they'll have the 2 biggest target shares, probably Amon-Ra first.
Right.
But I do like Jameson this year, so I was very happy to get him in the 12th. I got Tyler Conklin in the 13th, who, Aaron Rodgers loves his tight ends, and Conklin has had he's actually been pretty productive considering how bad the Jets quarterbacks have been, and I don't really love their receivers after Garrett Wilson, so I was happy to get him. And then in the 14th, Keon Coleman, another Bill receiver, rookie who I really like also. So those were my favorite picks after my 10th pick. I got Darnell Mooney really late. I kind of like that one also. Kirk Cousins going to sling it. And, Mooney was pretty good a couple years ago. And so I could see him, being kind of like the forgotten guy who does well in Atlanta's offense as the number 2 receiver, assuming he is the number 2 receiver. How about you, Paul? After pick 10, who are your favorite adds to your roster?
After pick 10, Daniel Jones, round 11, the fact that he was still there, I'm like, again, that mobile quarterback who is kind of undervalued right now. You look at the additions that the Giants made this offseason, hoping for, maybe not so much a bounce back year, but get a better idea of who Daniel Jones might actually really be as a quarterback. And I think this Giants offense has some sneaky potential to at least be exciting, be fantasy relevant, right?
Yeah.
Pick 12.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying you have neighbors too, and so that's, kind of a nice fit as your third quarterback.
Exactly, yeah. Round 12, I kind of fell into what might be a value trap, but he was just sitting there. And J.J. McCarthy with my 12th pick as my 4th quarterback. Who knows if he'll start week 1, but as somebody to hold in case of an injury, or if he does finally get the starting job, maybe Sam Darnold's not playing well, and, you start to hear the whispers about will McCarthy come out. He has a mobile skill set as well, and playing with Justin Jefferson and playing in that offense. I mean, I like the upside again. Upside's been kind of the theme of my team here. Josh Palmer in round 13 was a really nice pick that I found, again, to be really good value. And then Johnny Smith, around 18, I think a forgotten tight end who had a good year last year under Arthur Smith. Got to love, got to think he can have a good season with Mike McDaniel out there in Miami. I'm not sure how many targets he'll have, but I can see some big games from him. And then Audric Esteen, round 20, potential starting running back for the Denver Broncos, at least maybe a goal line guy or a change of pace type of guy. I think he'll have a role as well.
Yeah, I love the Palmer pick. He talk about a team that had a lot of targets walk out the door. I mean, the Chargers had all their targets basically between Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, and Austin Eckler. That was like 90% of the pie there. And Palmer's the one guy who's been there. And he's another third-year receiver, in that pattern. So I like that a lot. One thing, and I like getting 3 quarterbacks or 4 quarterbacks. I really think in a super flex format, you do yourself a disservice if you leave the draft with only 2 starting quarterbacks. We've seen over the last 2 years, like more than 60 QBs start games in the NFL in each of the last 2 seasons. QBs have gotten hurt and hurt often. We see it the last 2 years with some big names. Last year, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and other QBs missed big chunks of the season. And I think in a format like this, even though you're passing on guys who might be like kind of borderline can start for you, especially during bye weeks, I think it's worth it in like the 9th or 10th round, as you and I both did, to take a third starting quarterback, because not everyone in a 12-team league is going to get 3 starters. And then there are teams where, like the Raiders, where you don't know who the starter is going to be for most of the season, or the Vikings are like that too. So you're not sure you can get, a starter from one of those teams. I think it's worth doing what both you and I, of course, you and I did it, so it's smart, right? But I do think I learned my first Scott Fishbowl that you really need 3 quarterbacks. My first year, I didn't have 3, and it ended up hurting me, although I was able to pick one up who was starting, which is unusual. Usually can't pick them up because they're all rostered.
So, Dave, how do you like your roster?
So, first of all, we'll talk about this in a minute. I'm assuming CeeDee Lamb is going to get paid, is not going to have a long holdout, and is going to be on the field doing what he did last year, which is, being at or near the lead in the NFL in targets, catches, yards, touchdowns, top 5 in all of those. If that's not the case, like if he doesn't play or something like that, then obviously not having your first round pick is a big deal. But I wasn't worried about it enough not to draft him. I was hoping for like more of a bully tight end build, but in my division, like the tight ends kind of flew off the board and nobody got more than one of the top 10 tight ends. They just got spread like peanut butter across the division. So no one really got that advantage in my division. I like the depth on my team. Everyone probably does because you're taking 22 players, but I think I got some guys in the teens that can really hopefully play in a pinch when I need them. I got 3 Bills, which I don't love, but overall I like my team. I don't love my team, is what I will say. Obviously, we'll see how it does. I think it's a solid team. Like I don't think I'm going to have a bad team, but I think I have a high floor, and I don't know that I have a high ceiling as I look at my team. Is kind of because I don't have like CeeDee Lamb. Like maybe last year was his best season. AJ Brown maybe last year was his best season.
Right.
Florida, maybe he doesn't get to 10 touchdowns again. I think you have more guys that could pop in a bigger way than I do, but you probably have a lower floor as well on your team.
Right.
So I was pretty happy with it, I would say, like 6 or 7 out of 10. How about you? Do you like your team? And And also, like, I guess another thing we should say is, and I know you've been drafting a lot in other leagues, but do you like your team, and did you learn anything that is going to help you in other redraft, season-long drafts for this season?
Before I answer, Dave, I got to ask you a question. Are you
Yeah.
a creamy or crunchy peanut butter guy?
I prefer crunchy. Always crunchy. It doesn't spread as well either.
Yeah.
So how about you?
Yeah, I love crunchy. My wife loves creamy, so I haven't had crunchy in a long time, Dave.
That's one of many places. I'm just looking now. I think I see Mets 11, Yankees 2. Woo hoo!
There you
Let's
go.
Yeah, that's one of many places where my wife and I are in agreement and simpaticos. We both like only crunchy peanut butter, and we actually eat a lot of peanut butter. It's weird because we're like the
Yeah.
ages we are. Like you think of it as like a little kid's food, but we eat a lot of peanut butter in this house. So thankfully, no one's got a peanut allergy. None of our kids had one. That would have been a problem. We would have had to ship them off somewhere.
All right, so let's get back to how do I like my roster?
I was asking you how you feel about your team.
Yes, sir. I like how my team turned out. If the bets I made on guys like Achan and Neighbors and Gino and even Daniel Jones pan out, I can see this team making some noise, to be honest.
Yeah, I like I said, you've got some upside players, which look, I love Devon Achan. I probably won't get much of him this year because I'm not sure I'm willing to pay the price to get kind of what could be a part-time player, but he doesn't need a lot of touches to score a lot of points. But in any case, any big regret from your draft? Like what? Anything you do different in retrospect?
My biggest regret, to be totally honest, is I wish I would have taken Jaden Daniels in round 2 or grabbed a tight end with top 12 potential with one of my top 5 picks.
Got it. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I would say for me, maybe. Well, first of all, if there's any real issue with CeeDee Lamb, then I'm going to regret not taking either Tyreek Hill or Anthony Richardson with the 8th pick. I Tyreek ranked as my second. There wasn't a running back there to take because the big three were gone when I picked 8th, which was surprising to me. I was going to consider Bijan if he was there. But so that's one. And then I don't know, AJ Brown over Dalton Kincaid. If Kincaid, like in year 2, is like 90 catches and 10 touchdowns and 1,100 yards in this format, that would be huge. So I knew I was kind of passing on that kind of big swing. But AJ Brown's AJ Brown, so we'll see.
So, that wraps up our SFB segment, Dave. Periodically during the season, we'll check in on this and let you guys know how our team is doing. An important aspect of SFB is, again, no trading, like Dave mentioned in the intro, but there are weekly waivers, and we have $100 FAB, if you will, free agent acquisition budget and blind bidding. So, and that's always nice during the season. You lose a guy to be able to have a really, everybody has an equal chance to get somebody to fill a void. I'm curious, how are you with your FAB? If you suffer an injury like early in the season to a major player, will you try to like bid heavy on their direct handcuff or backup, or how do you play that out?
I think it all depends on how desperate you are. Like last year, I had Nick Chubb, and he went down in the second game of the season. If Jerome Ford had not been drafted, if he was on waivers, I would have probably spent like 70 or 80% of my FAB budget to make sure I got him. So sometimes you just kind of have no choice. I prefer to kind of use it across the season. I mean, one thing to remember is your FAB dollars are worth a little more early in the season because anyone you're buying for more weeks, arguably. So I don't mind using a little more FAB budget early, but I don't like running out of it. And especially in a format like this, where like if you make the playoffs, there are bye weeks, still. Like week 12 is a big NFL bye week, and that's the first week of the Scott Fish Bowl playoffs. Now, again, in the playoffs, you do get your average score from during the season. So, that if you had a really good season, you're going to get those points as a floor. But if you have like half your team on bye, it's going to make it hard to advance. So waivers can be helpful there, maybe.
Yeah.
22-person rosters, the waiver wire isn't great in Scott Fish Bowl, right? Because you got like 250 players rostered in each division. So, but there are guys to pick up. So I tend to try to save some money if I can, but if I'm in need, like 2 years ago, not in Scott Fish Bowl, but in my main league, I didn't even have whoever the Niners starting running back was, but I lost a running back, and Elijah Mitchell like suddenly was their starter week 1, and I used almost all my fab budget to get him, and it was worth it. But it made the rest of the season challenging because I didn't have any money. How about you, Paul? Are you frugal or are you a spender?
Every situation is different, honestly. There have been times where I had a chance to get somebody early and I didn't. And then there have been times when I got somebody early and later in the season, I wish I had saved that money to grab somebody else who turned out to be a little bit better or more important to my team. That being said, it just, like I said, every situation is different. More often than not, I'm pretty frugal at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit because training camps have opened. And, the one thing that always happens at the beginning of training camp is you hear about all the guys who are in the best shape of their lives, which is kind of funny because they're professional athletes and they are pretty much always in the best shape of their lives, or they should be. But in any case, there'll be a lot of stories coming out of training camps to break down as we go. One that I've been keeping an eye on because of kind of what happened last year with his calf injury is Joe Burrow, who, is recovering from kind of a dangerous injury for a quarterback because it was his throwing the wrist on his ligaments and the wrist on his throwing hand or on his throwing arm. He's been cleared for contact, whatever that means, but he didn't throw at OTAs as he continues to recover from that wrist injury. Like I said, we all remember like last summer he had that calf injury and they said he was fine, and then he was not good at the start of the season. And then, of course, he started playing better, and then he got hurt again and missed the rest of the season. What's your level of concern with Burrow, and then by association with like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? Obviously, you just drafted T. Higgins in Scott Fish Bowl, but what is your take on the whole Burrow situation?
So after what happened with Joe Burrow last year, I don't see the coaching staff, ownership, or Burrow really allowing himself to play when he's not 100%. Because of that, I'm really not worried. I'm hoping everyone learned their lesson last year, and I'm excited for all parties involved in the Bengals offense, to be honest.
Fair enough. I have him as my QB 10 right now. But I'm assuming that I'll be moving him up. I'm just waiting to sort of see that he's okay and that he is throwing in practice and making all the throws and not wincing and, not needing hours of icing and, and then hopefully he'll play a little bit in the preseason. Usually a player like him might barely play in the preseason, but because he hasn't played since November, or early December, whenever he got hurt. I can't remember when it was. I think it was November. Maybe he'll get a little more action.
Absolutely, yeah. So reports out of Atlanta are that Kyle Pitts may play snaps at wide receiver, and that they're figuring out all sorts of ways to get Bijan more involved. I know you mentioned if Bijan had been there for you when your Scott Fish Bowl draft, you would have taken him. But does any of that matter? And is the hype too high for all the Falcons' main pieces?
It's funny with the Falcons because it's like they were the most frustrating, probably, team in fantasy the last few years because they used a top 5 pick on Pitts, a top 10 pick on Drake London, and then a top 10 pick on Bijan in 3 straight years. And then barely, didn't use those guys to their maximum potential, and, didn't really have anything resembling solid quarterback play with a whole bunch of, different quarterbacks who played there, Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ritter, and, I guess maybe that first year with Pitts, the end of Matt Ryan, I can't really remember anymore. So it's been frustrating, and, Pitts has gotten hurt a couple times. I mean, London, Pitts, and Bijan are all, huge. I mean, you can't call Bijan a breakout candidate, really, but people are expecting very big things from all 3 of those guys, and I'm expecting it from Bijan. He's got the talent. They have a great offensive line. Yes, he'll still share a little bit with Tyler Algier, but with Kirk Cousins there, I just expect the whole offense to be better. And I could just see him blowing up and being the number 1 running back this year. There's a pretty easy path to see that, I think, just given the talent and the situation he's in. Pitts, I'll let someone else draft Kyle Pitts, I think. And it's great if they line him up all over the field. We just haven't seen it consistently with him yet. And until we do, I'm one of those people that got burned on him in his 2nd year. Burned once, it makes me more cautious. What about you? How are you? Drake London, I like, but again, he's probably a player I won't get that much of because I think he's being drafted a little bit too high. There's a little bit too much of an assumption of a huge breakout into the top 12 receivers. And I just don't, there's a lot of good receivers, and I'll take Deebo Samuel over him, and I see him ranked ahead of Deebo in a lot of places. I'll go with a more proven commodity. How about you? How are you looking at all these Falcons?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I really thought Pitts had been playing snaps at wide receiver already. So, that kind of news just seems more like hype and not so much any new information that should be helping us make decisions. Or I'm definitely intrigued at the thought of Bijan getting used more as just a runner, especially with his skill set. I don't think the hype is too high for me. You mentioned Darnell Mooney earlier. He's somebody I like a lot in best ball. I think, we've seen what Kirk Cousins can do. I'm excited for this Atlanta Falcons offense, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's go to the star on your hat right now. What do you make of the Cowboys' backfield, and do you think they're going to trade for someone or sign someone before the season? And if so, some of the names I've heard are like Khalil Herbert or Javonte Williams, maybe Samaje Perine, backs who could either get cut or whose teams might be looking to get rid of them. Well, what do you think?
I did a video about this just because ESPN had recently ranked the Cowboys running back room the worst in the NFL. That being said, I look at Zeke. I think Zeke will be named the starter, but will be used as the short yardage and red zone back. Rico will do all the dirty work between the 20s, and Deuce Vaughn is probably our best pass catching back, easily our most electric running back. He'll be our change of pace back, at least I hope so. But unless Rico or Zeke get injured, I don't see Dallas trading for or signing anyone of note, only because they did sign Royce Freeman in the offseason. They also have a guy, Snoop Connor, who's still rather young with some tread on the tires. Nobody really – they have a lot of guys who have the same skill set. So I'm kind of getting an idea of what their running game to be like, maybe more of a power back system. But I just can't see them bringing in anybody unless somebody's injured. Got it.
I hear you.
What are your thoughts on the Dallas running backs, Dave? Or anybody you like in fantasy?
I had a couple chances to take Zeke and Dowdle in my Scott Fishbowl draft, but there was always a player I wanted more, and I was just so unsure of that backfield. I think Dowdle will, if they don't make a move, I think Dowdle will end up with the most fantasy points of the three, and could be a decent value if you can get him, pretty late in drafts. I do think Zeke, they'll trust him the most when they get close. So he could have a bunch. I mean, that they did lead the NFL in points last year. So there are points to be had by their running backs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sticking with running backs, reports are on Devon Achane are glowing, and he's 100% healthy, but he's also still only about 185 pounds. If you want him, he'll cost a second-round pick. Is that too rich for him? And what do you think about Raheem Mostert, who finished last season as the RB2 and who you can get 7 or so rounds later?
Yeah, like I said, I probably will end up with very little of a Chan, and I'm a Dolphin fan, just because I think that's a little rich for a guy who had trouble staying healthy in his rookie year. I mean, his statistics were so ridiculous. I don't know if he can have that kind of efficiency again. He averaged more yards per carry than I think any qualifying running back in the history of the league. He averaged 8 yards per carry last year, like 7.8. But he is that fast. And in that offense, with the way defenses have to account for like Tyreek and Waddle, and the motion they use, that Shanahan kind of offense that they run, he just gets big creases and he's gone. So I could see the appeal. Like after what he did for those couple weeks last year, it's like he could be a league winner. But a second round price is no bargain for that. I do like the price on Mostert. Like I just think there's not that much risk in taking him. And I know they drafted Jalen Wright. I know Achane will get more work. I know Mostert's the oldest running back in the league, but they scored a lot of ground touchdowns last year. They don't want Tua running, especially around the goal line. So of the two, I'll probably, and I would probably lean towards taking Mostert just because it costs so much less. But I know you got a Chan in, which I think is the right way to pronounce it, not A-Chain, but A-Chain sounds so much faster.
Yeah.
I took him in Scott Fishbowl, and I see the appeal, and especially in something like Scott Fishbowl, as opposed to a home league, with your close friends.
Yeah. So, you missed this, Dave, but, we always do a bold call at the end of our episodes. Whenever I discuss the AFC East with John McGlynn, my bold call was that the Miami Dolphins running backs will score a combined 40 touchdowns.
That's a lot. What did they have last year? Around 30?
Raheem Mostert had 19 by himself, I believe, and Achane, I believe he had 7 or 8, I thought.
Yeah, well, he had 4 in the Broncos game, so they're just starting there. I mean, they had to be close to 30 last year. So I don't know if Jeff Wilson got any or Savon Ahmed.
I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but I don't remember.
Yeah, they could have.
I want to say their 4th stringer had a couple of games as well.
Yeah, because Achane got hurt and then Jeff Wilson got hurt.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm excited about that backfield.
Yeah. But thinking of Miami, just talking about Miami's running backs real quick, like I've been doing rankings for the last week, and I think Miami's running backs, Houston's receivers, and Green Bay's receivers have been the hardest position groups for me to rank because they're all got a lot of guys who are good, and it's just unclear how the pie is going to be divided. So,
yeah,
like a guy like Jaden Reed or a guy like Dell or Stephon Diggs, it's just a little hard to know what their target volume is going to be in crowded situations. I guess the Bills and the Chargers too, just in the sense of, it's all new guys pretty much in their receiver group. So I did have trouble ranking the Miami running backs a little bit. And their ADPs are like, Achane real early, Mostert in the middle, Jalen Wright last round, almost is kind of where they're being drafted now. But and that probably won't change. And we'll see what the usage is and who stays healthy.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Paul, we're almost ready to wrap up here, but it's another off season, and this year there aren't too many, but there are some players who may or may not hold out or hold in over getting a new contract. You know, we know about Brandon Ayuk. He reported, but has asked for a trade. CeeDee Lamb wants a new contract and hasn't reported. I think Jamar Chase maybe wants a new contract, but I'm not sure about him. Jordan Love has not gotten his new contract yet, neither has Tua. Matt Stafford wants more money. Sounds like they're going to give it to him. Are there any of these players that you're actually worried about, like missing any significant time of training camp, which can always be a bad sign for the start of the season? You know, sometimes guys who hold out either show up out of shape like Josh Jacobs did, and or get hurt because they didn't practice as much.
Yeah.
So anyone you're worried about in that group?
Well, I remember seeing last week that Jordan Love said he wasn't going to practice until he got a deal. I'm not sure how much of it made of that, or if that was just a headline grabbing type of thing there. The easy answer is Ayuk here, but apparently, you know, he's accepted the fact that he'll be playing on a 1-year deal. I know he did request a trade, but you know, I do think ultimately that he will, you know, end up playing this year. Of this group, though, I think I'm most worried about CD, only because Cowboys ownership has been known to offer their players and coaches lowball offers. I do think that a CD deal will get done, but I am just worried that ownership might try to give him a disrespectful offer.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And honestly, like they should give him something close to what Justin Jefferson got, I would think. I mean, he's in that range and he's around the same age. So, you know, we'll see. We will see.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. For my sanity, I hope CeeDee Lamb gets a deal real soon.
Yeah, and for mine too, because I took him with my first pick in the Scott Fish Bowl.
Exactly. All right, Dave, here we are with bold call, training camp edition. Give us a bold call here, Dave.
I don't know how bold this is, but I think Cortland Sutton is going to get traded. He's another guy who I think has a contract issue. He scored 10 touchdowns last year, but didn't really have a great season in terms of like catches and yards. I don't know what the rest of the league thinks of him, but there are probably some teams, you know, that are maybe in the market for another wide receiver. So my bold and you know, I think Sean Payton has shown they could trade him and Javonte Williams. Like I think Sean Payton has shown that like guys that were not the guys he drafted, you know, there's not a ton of loyalty there. He wants to build that team kind of in the image of how he built the Saints and like with his guys. So I don't know how bold this is, but I think one or both of those guys is going to get traded, and or maybe Javonte just gets cut. And they save money. What's your bold call? Training camp edition.
All right, Dave. You know this is kind of where I shine most episodes here, Dave. Sitting next to you here with all your stats and your
bolder. Your bold calls are bolder.
I think Michael Penix Jr. will make Atlanta consider starting him over Kirk Cousins.
Really? That's interesting. They gave Kirk a lot of money, so that is bold.
They did, and they still proceeded to take him with a top 10 pick. So.
You know, when I was talking about all those first-round picks for the Falcons, I didn't mention him because we were really talking about the skill position players, but it's crazy. In the last 4 years, it's like a fantasy team. They've used four top 10 picks on a quarterback, a running back, a receiver, and a tight end.
Yeah,
they're just playing fantasy football.
All right, Dave, you mentioned your new opportunity at the beginning of the episode. Can you talk to us a little bit about the content you're creating for SB Nation again and where we can find it?
Yeah, absolutely. So bigblueview.com, which is the Giants site, that's their blog site on SB Nation. And like I said, I've got rankings, articles. Wide receivers article will be up tomorrow, I'm told. So we'll have running backs, quarterbacks, and receivers up. And these are like tiers, rankings, and position breakdown kind of articles. And I've got a couple of other. I did an article on players who are hard to rank. And I'll have like I said, more preseason draft content, strategy articles, player articles, values, sleepers, that kind of thing. And again, bigblueview.com, but also on X, I post links to all my articles. So if you follow me at Pigskin Papers on X, you will see all of my content posted there as well. And for you, Paul, where can people find your content?
Yes, you can find my content on X, aka Twitter, and on YouTube. And I'm hoping and praying. I've been trying to work on it, but my written content, you'll be able to find on King Fantasy Sports. I'm hoping to get back to writing this season. I'm really starting to get the itch, especially
you definitely should
reading your articles and everything.
You definitely should, Paul. You definitely should. You're a good writer, and I know you miss it. So I know it's hard to find the time. You know, you got a young family, not like me with my kids out of the house. So it's tough. You know, you're working jobs and trying to find time to do that. So I hope you do get that chance. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I hope we didn't bore people with our Scott Fishbowl team. Every now and then during the season, we'll just check in and see how we're both doing. But this was a lot of fun tonight. It was great to get back on the mic. And let's go Mets.
Yes, sir. Let's go Rangers. Dave, one more time, where can we find you on X?
At Pigskin Papers. Both of those P's are capitalized.
Guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on X at Paul_Ryan15. We appreciate you joining us, and we will see you guys next week.